In the not too distant apocalyptic future, the world has turned into an endless desert. Food, water, and basic road etiquette are everyday struggles. But fear not, as the future has sat-navs with lifetime batteries and self-charging NOS canisters. In this future, there is a man that has a special gift of not being susceptible to most kinds of fire. But unfortunately, this oddly specific gift, not even James Randi could debunk, comes with a curse, for it demands sacrifice by way of death from random levitation. That introduction is a good indicator to how many botfly larvas I'm going to have to tug out of this poor parasitic ridden mutt, but before I start extracting, I'm going to start off by saying, though I personally found it hard to stay awake while playing Mad Max, I can see how the game could appeal to the casual gamer, or to the kind of person that can't get enough of open world collectathons. However, for the more travelled gamer, there is very little Mad Max can offer you. Because if you've completed any open world collectathon before, driven a car in third person, and played anything that has something like the Batman style fighting system, which you most likely have by this point, you simply don't have to waste your time or money on Mad Max because you've already played it. Mad Max is just a reskin of a by the numbers open world game, but it's bare bones and lacks polish. I think initially the majority of people that play Mad Max have fallen into the trap of collecting crap with the assumption that there will be a significant payoff at some point. I can tell you for a fact that there isn't, but I would happily wager half a tin of dog food that most people would have got bored of the repetitiveness way before figuring it out for themselves. When I cottoned on to this, I decided to ignore all of the stuff to collect and focus on the game's story instead. This I found is the best way to get some blood out of Mad Max's stone, mainly because it cuts out all of the needless slog of collecting stuff that I didn't need. I didn't need any of the unlocks from the extra scavenging curriculum in order to complete the game, because decent enough upgrades are unlocked by just doing the game's main missions and side quests. In hindsight, if I knew this from the beginning, I wouldn't have wasted so much time on the game. This may have softened my opinion of Mad Max, but only because it would have had less of a chance to outstay its welcome. Now that we're here, we might as well address the obvious. The only reason that there's so much stuff to collect is to pad the game's runtime, as the length of the story and the rewards for collecting everything in no way justifies the amount of time it takes to go round and collect all of the collectibles. I know because I am one of the handful of people that has actually gone round and done it. The story itself is pretty lackluster, spread over 15 missions. You will embark on a discounted standard revenge story scavenged from the film's sun-bleached skeleton. There are forgettable characters and the missions have nothing worth mentioning, mainly because you do most of it all of the time when you're going around scavenging anyway. Here's the rundown of what you would do for the majority of the game. Drive somewhere, maybe blow up some cars on the way. When you get to where you're going, you would possibly have to take down some fort defences, punch some people, collect crap, rinse and repeat. The thing I came to realise was the quantity of stuff to collect pales in comparison to Max's biggest problem, because collecting crap is only the vessel that drags you on your journey to the realisation of the real problem the game has.
I am going to treat you all to an activity so heart-wrenchingly boring and physically exhausting that it is guaranteed to render your soul broken beyond repair.
This is what Mad Max feels like to play. And because of the tediousness of the game, I couldn't help but claw for stimulation of any kind. Unfortunately for Mad Max, the harder I looked, the more I found annoyances and examples of shoddy game development. Though some of them may seem petty, just keep in mind, an itch soon becomes a maddening rash when it is scratched repeatedly. Let me start up the rash again by looking at the baffling 1.06 update, which was 33GB. When I saw this update, my first response was, why the hell are they bothering to update such a throwaway game when there are more recent dumpster fires to put out? But even more puzzling than that is how the update so long after release can make a game more of a mess than it was beforehand. This just shows the level of incompetence we're working with. Now 33GB sprung up some red flags as it's pretty much the size of the entire game. This leads me to believe that they made me pretty much reinstall the entire game again just for a patch. Is this laziness or a convoluted way to hide the size of the patch file? Maybe it's both. In any case, the update doesn't resolve any of the terrible design choices and only adds technical issues. Honestly, it seemed like every 10 minutes or so I found something to make note of. Amateur level stuff which is inexcusable, like floating crates, not being able to open crates, and weapon kill animations clipping through walls, to name a few. Just really basic stuff. The only updates to the game that I noticed were to the introduction screens at the beginning of the game. On the very first loading screen they added Max on the right punching some guy. Then when you move on to the press any button to start the game screen, I noticed they have flashed it up with slow cinematic side-scrolling pictures. 33GB for this? Well, apparently they have sorted the buggy platinum trophy, which according to every guide I have come across has been an issue since release. But the jury is still out on this one. Personally, I think the best thing they added with the update is the malevolent entity. This gives the game much needed life, because not only does it launch Max into the air every now and then, but on the rare occasion it also teleports enemies to other dimensions. But more commonly it possesses them to make stupid decisions, like attempting suicidal jumps. The inclusion of this godlike entity also answers the question of who the hell is packing crates full of scrap and throwing them out into storms. So I searched the internet world for the details on the update. The best I could find was this page on updatecrazy.com, who claimed to get their information from the official patch notes. However, I couldn't find anything about updates or patches on Avalanche Studios site, or the Warner Brothers site for that matter. Both of them just have bare bones marketing pages for the game, so I have no idea where Update Crazy got their information from or who wrote the article. Over on Reddit there is a feed on the 1.06 update dating back to 2018, and I'm at a bit of a loss on this one because I got this update a few weeks ago on the PS4. So here's a helpful tip people, include links to the sources that you claim to get your information from. Funny enough, links are something else Avalanche Studios can't get right, as the link from their site to the Warner Brothers site doesn't work, and I can't help but wonder if it ever has. What a shit show we have on our hands. Mad Max is not only one of the most irrelevant genre-devolving cash-in movie license games I have played in recent memory, but it also manages to be more generic, maybe even the most generic AAA open-world collectathons of this generation. Sadly, that's not the worst of it, because it's hard to find anything this game manages to do right. Though I did find some superficial things. I like that you can save cars that you steal from pasty white boys. That's right, no other races survived this Australian apocalypse. Who knew the Australian god was racist? That eye-opening fact aside, storing cars is done in a GTA style fashion. Steal a car, take it back to the home base, and it's yours. To never do anything with ever again. Because you can't modify them in any way, and you won't use them in the death races because your magnum opus is always going to be better. It's just another optional thing to collect on the long list of optional things to collect. See, I can't even say a positive thing about the game without undermining it. Okay, I admit I did like some of the cutscenes, but I'm not counting them as this is a game, not a film, and the film is miles better. And as a game, the game part should be the focal point of interest. My personal favourite cutscene is this one where Max coldly rejects the world's ugliest kid, even though she has a hot mum. It really just shows the level of contempt Max has for people, because it must have been years since that boy has had a bit. Yet he is not in the least bit interested in one of the only few willing subservient hot women for miles. He truly is bloody mad.
Our contract is done. Hey.
It's a present. For you.
Together we can build more than a life raft.
What a load of oh shit. So long, gay boys!
Well played, Max. I think we all could learn something from Max's examples. Anyway, I like that some of the upgrades make sense, like how Max can deal more damage because he has better knuckle dusters, and how he can take less damage because he's wearing better armour. Though how body armour reduces damages from punches to the face doesn't really make sense. Another thing that doesn't make sense is how he can get extra water and nutrition from food through upgrades. Is he like a really shit Jesus? It's just another example of half-baked ideas. The car upgrades are pretty good for this style of game, though like with most games it could do with more because the upgrades are quite limited and uncreative. This also applies to the cars themselves. I mean, why didn't they put beefed up hot rods and monster trucks in? It's a game, make it fun for fuck's sake, please. The final thing I can remember liking is that the game doesn't have regenerating health. And that's it, that's everything I liked about Mad Max. Somewhat naively, I expected more from Mad Max. Don't get me wrong, my expectations were realistic in that I didn't expect the game to be groundbreaking in any way. I basically wanted the intro to Fury Road as a game. At a glance you could say that the game does have that, but it just lacks attention to detail, and any fun that can be found is short-lived as it quickly becomes stagnant. It's a shame because I think Mad Max is an ideal movie franchise to make an open world game from. However, in a saturated genre, a game really needs to stand out from the crowd. This game needed something other than a palette swap from the typical open world template, a game loop hook of some kind. I found Mad Max subjectively failed to do anything significantly fun that distinguished it enough from other, older, cheaper games. That's enough of bashing the game, it's time to pick on Max. Max handles like a lot of protagonists from the third person perspective, which means he bumbles around at times, making precise movements unnecessarily more difficult than they should be. Thankfully, the world design doesn't allow this to be exposed as much as it would be in a game that has more intricate design. Now, this being a third-person game, it also suffers with the camera. When you get too close to anything large in the forefront, you won't be able to see where Max or enemies are. Fighting in this situation is literally fighting blind. In this situation, you have to fight whoever is trying to hit you and the positioning of the camera to try and see where everyone is. Best option is to roll around until you find an open space. This really shouldn't be a problem in a modern game, but instead of solving the issue, I believe the developers simply opted to not put enemies in these locations for the most part. Now, this is not the only third-person game to have issues with the camera and character control. It is why I personally prefer the first-person perspective. They obviously chose third-person to appeal to casual gamers. The other issue with Max is his shotgun. For a start, his stance is over-exaggerated. He stands like he's just about to draw at high noon. And why can't he move while aiming? It's a sawn-off shotgun. The whole point of sawing off the barrel is to make it shorter and lighter so it's easier to conceal, quicker to aim with, and most importantly, improves movability. The game also has auto-aim, which for the most part didn't hit what I wanted to, and sometimes didn't hit anything at all. It's basically an aimbot you vaguely point in a direction. From there, the bot decides. An example of this being a hindrance is when I tried lining up enemies near an explosive barrel. When they were all in position, I took a shot facing the barrel, but the game decided I wanted to shoot the nearest enemy instead. So I tried free aiming, but the game locked onto another person. By the time I had moved the aim off the person onto the barrel, everyone was out of range of the barrel's explosion. Then I got a slap in the face for daring to try and have some fun with this game. By far the strangest thing I can't work out is the button commands, because to perform some actions you simply have to press a button, but for others you have to hold a button down. An example of this is getting in and out of cars. To get in a car you have to hold triangle, to get out of a car you have to press triangle. Why? I can only think they decided to do this to actively annoy, or is this just one of those things some developers do to try and distinguish themselves from other games at the cost of unnecessarily screwing up perfectly fine controls? Just imagine for a moment how frustrating GTA 5 would be if you had to hold triangle or Y to get in a car every time. People would quickly become pissed off of it, and rightly so because it's fucking stupid. So why, Avalanche Studios, have you decided to do this? What does holding down the action button to get into cars add to the game? Absolutely nothing is the answer. It baffles me because they've applied logic with holding down the action button to break insignias and doors down, and applied logic again with tapping the action button to jimmy things open. So why in fuck's name haven't they applied the same logic with getting into cars or picking things up? Yeah, that's right, you have to hold down X or A to pick up and drop weapons as well. Let me expand on this because this is a frustration in itself. So at times when you want to pick something up, like scrap while holding a weapon, you run the risk of dropping your weapon instead of picking up the scrap, because you weren't in the precise spot to pick the scrap up. If you drop your weapon, it is likely that you'll think, fuck it, I'll leave the weapon and just pick up the scrap. However, it's highly likely that you will pick up the weapon instead of the scrap. Why not just map dropping the weapon to another button? There's plenty of them. Because of this, I pretty much gave up on using weapons because I knew I'd come across this problem again and again. On deciding to avoid it, from then on every time I saw a weapon I thought of encountering this nonsense anyway, which only added to the list of things that consistently bugged me about the game. Carrying on this trend of stupidity, to fill up your car you have to press square, to fill up your canteen you have to hold X. Once you have done this, the game will cut to a kind of short cutscene. After filling up, it then fades to a black transition before putting you back into the game. The fuck is the point of all of this apart from more time wasting for the sake of making the game more cinematic? I think Mad Max has taken a page out of Senua's book of wasting my time. I'm going to take a moment here before I carry on to justify my petty complaints by pointing out the obvious, that you will encounter all of these annoyances consistently throughout the game. Like drinking from a canteen, it's another example of unnecessary button holding. To drink you have to continuously hold up on the D-pad. Why, when filling the canteen, just does it after holding down X with the option to stop. But I never had a situation where I didn't want to fill my health bar with all of the water I had. This one in particular gets increasingly annoying as you progress through the game, because as you progress you will unlock more health, which means you're going to be standing for longer periods just filling up your health bar by holding up on the D-pad.
What would have been the problem of pressing up on the D-pad to drink till the canteen is empty, with the option of pressing up again if you want to stop? You might not be surprised to hear that I spent a lot of time thinking about all of this to try and find some reasoning for all of this nonsense. My conclusion is that all of this unnecessary button holding is only there to piss me off and ensure that I'm still awake by forcing constant minimal interaction. To me it felt like the routine mundane inputs were only there to ensure that I was still awake. Moving on to the fighting, it's basically a discount Arkham fighting system with a limited moveset that's less polished. Pretty much all of the attacks are punches with some wrestling moves thrown in. Nothing too flamboyant like the Cape Crusader, but I will take anything remotely fun at this point. Though the moveset is more restrained, it fits in more with the theme of Mad Max, but it can't get away from the fact that in comparison to Batman it's a lot less fun. Now I understand that they want it to be more realistic, but that doesn't mean that the combat has to be boring. If you want to play something that gets the best out of the system, just play one of the Arkham games. If you want something that's more fun and realistic, play the Warriors, both are better and cheaper. The combat's also not as fluid as Batman because once you've thrown a punch you are committed to it, so you can't block or counter afterwards. This means that you have to be more mindful with your attacks. This can be seen as a good thing as it's better suited to the theme of the game, or you can see it as not being as fluid as Batman. The similarity Mad Max has with Batman is sometimes you have to counter just before an attack if an enemy is close, because if you counter when the prompt appears you'll be too late. So you have to kind of fight with predictive thinking. However, I frequently get too smart for my own good because I picked up a bad habit of countering too early, which means I get smacked a lot for being a smartass, just like in real life. It shows that the prompt should be tweaked to appear when the window to counter is still open, because as it stands, the prompt is useless. It should be dynamic based on the distance the enemy is from the player. The closer they are, the earlier the prompt should be. Another issue with the combat is the stealth kills. When the rare opportunity comes around to get a stealth kill, I found that most of the time it didn't work. An added problem with getting a stealth kill is that you can't crouch, so there isn't a way of creeping up on people. The only thing to try was walking slowly, but this didn't work for me either. All I could do was quickly run up to someone and tap X like mad with the hope that it would work. Again, I'm going to moan about the button layout because stealth kills are mapped to X when the attacks are mapped to square. Avalanche have managed to screw this one up as well, as most people would naturally think stealth kills would be mapped to the primary attack, or triangle, as triangle has been widely used in third-person games for stealth kills for years. But Avalanche decided to use X instead. I suppose it's just more screwing around with standardised button layouts for the hell of it. The enemies in the game are as varied as one would expect from the typical trash mobs. You get the weak fast moving ones and the slow hard hitting ones with more health, alongside some enemies with weapons. They have also taken the enemy with the shield from Batman as well. Both of these have heavy attacks that you have to dodge. There's also suicide bombers and snipers dotted around. The drummer is the only one that stands out as bringing something less predictable to the table, as he buffs the attack damage and health to all of the enemies around him. The buff also makes enemies more aggressive, so they throw a lot more punches. This is the only aspect that brings a challenge to the combat. However, I found an easy exploit for this, as you can simply lead enemies away from the drummer. Just keep going until they're out of the range of the buffing area. Another boundary exploit I found is getting enemies to follow you to the entrance of the camps. They would just stand there at the entrance throwing rocks, which gives you the opportunity to decide if you want to kill them with your harpoon, sniper or thunderpoon from the relative safety of your car. Just be aware that these boys are dead-eyes with their rocks. The game also has mini-bosses which are called top dogs. Essentially they are Imoliths from The Witcher 3. I say this because all of them have the same limited generic moveset you would expect to find from big dudes with big hammers. The only difference between them is that they look different, and some of them have trash mobs and fire accompanying them for you to deal with. Also, some of them take more damage from weapons. My point is, these top dogs are blatantly copied and pasted with the least amount of effort put into covering up the fact. Avalanche Studios should be embarrassed by this. I've also wondered what the hell these boys are eating to sustain the units that they are, because throughout the game all Max manages to find is maggots and open cans of dog food, so where the hell are these boys getting their eggs, steaks and protein shakes from? Something I didn't expect and quite liked is that the enemies can damage each other, and they can get killed by environmental hazards, like tornadoes. But my favourite thing to do is to get some dope to run into an obvious landmine in front of me. That reminds me that the mines are another Slapdash affair. It starts off well enough as you use the dog that you saved at the beginning of the game to find mines. For those that don't know, dogs can be trained to sniff them out. We would just have to assume that the dog was already trained to do so before Max found him. But the continuity of shoddy design doesn't take long to rear its ugly head again, as the dog is able to sniff out mines from the back of a car. But what's more remarkable is that the dog uses telekinetic barks to surface them. I also assume it uses telekinesis to stay in the car while I'm jumping off dunes. Avalanche, why couldn't you be bothered to animate the dog to leave the car and sniff around for the mines? And why didn't you bother animating Max uncovering them before disarming them? Why can't you do anything right? How much more effort would have this been? And I won't take that the dog being injured as a reason for it not walking, because there's no way that a dog that couldn't walk wouldn't be spit roasted when everyone is living off maggots and dog food, unless this telekinetic dog is supposed to be taken as canon. But I think it's far more likely that they just couldn't be bothered to program the dog to find mines because, fuck it, that's more work, innit?
Let's move on to the cars. It took me a while to put my finger on what the driving reminded me of, but it finally came to me. It reminded me of the original Driver. Though it's not as bad as the original Driver, the unresponsiveness, unpredictability and wanky camera made me dig it out of the recesses of my mind. I thought the shitty handling cars would be a temporary thing, as there's quite a lot of them to unlock. I was wrong, they all handle like shit. Even the final car that you unlock with the handling maxed out. And for most of the game everyone is faster than you. They also drive like they're glued to the road, never bodging up turn-ins unless you trigger their AI response. Just try and get in front of one of them and outrun him. Even with a pretty decent car, most of the time it's not possible. What really takes the piss is that the hunchback calls me Master Driver. I genuinely felt like I was mugging the dude off. What really threw me off about the driving is that at times the game completely ignores commands and overreacts to minor adjustments, just like Driver does. So I never really felt like I confidently knew what the car was going to do at any given time. Maybe that's a bit of a tad over exaggeration, but you get what I mean. Thankfully, as the game is set in a desolate wasteland, the lack of attention put into the car can somewhat go unnoticed, until you get to the Thunderdome or some of the racetracks. You see, the great minds at Avalanche are so blind to how shitty their cars handle, that they thought they would throw in races, just in case you somehow missed how shitty the handling is. The camera again has a plethora of problems. One of the most annoying ones is when you adjust it, because it will stay facing wherever you've moved it to for far too long before it resets to the default driving position. So if you're a normal person and want to look what's beyond the turn, you will find that when you've got to the turn that the camera is still stuck at the angle that you used to look ahead. Which is a pain in the ass because it means you're going to have to either adjust the camera while turning or just turn with a wanky camera angle. Best place to experience the fight with the camera is underground at the Thunderdome. The best place to experience the unresponsiveness of the cars is at the jaw entrance. Just try going through the entrance at full speed. Bear in mind that you have plenty of space and time to line yourself up for it. I rarely got through without the same effort needed to fight off a horny St. Bernard. I honestly think that getting through both scenarios without getting smashed just comes down to sheer luck. To prove to myself that the handling is shit and it's not just me, I simply measured how long I could stay on a relatively straight and narrow road without veering off. Turns out it's bloody hard. I don't understand how they could screw this up. I might as well say while I'm here that the platinum is bugged for me as I can't get the Please Drive Faster challenge. I have driven up and down the longest highway for about 3 hours. There is no way that I haven't done the challenge within this time. Back to some camera issues. Because the game is insistent on auto-aiming, the camera has to lock on to whatever you're aiming at. This has the same issue the shotgun has with aiming at things that I don't want it to, including blown up cars and dead people. Which is why they have put in a slow-mo to compensate for it being a prick, which only slows down the boring combat, increasing the boredom even further. This is somewhat bearable if you're using the one-hit kill Thunderpoon. But if you use the harpoon, the camera locks onto whatever you've shot, which in most cases means that the camera is now facing backwards while you're driving forwards. I think you can gather what the problem is here.
And don't even think about swinging the camera back round because it simply won't let you. My advice is don't bother fighting with the camera, just accept that you're its bitch and just try and work around it. I think it's fair to say that not being able to see where you're going in a game where driving is a major component is nothing short of a major fuck up. Especially after a 33GB update, which also didn't fix the buggy platinum, for me anyway, and it's 5 years after release. Is the car combat fun? No, not really, because not only is your car for the majority of the game slower than everyone else's, but it's also weaker, which means it's better to avoid combat. The best way to do this is just to get out your car and find high ground. Because the enemies always leave their car, it's just quicker and more efficient to go hand to hand. That's until you unlock the Thunderpoon, then you pretty much one-shot everything, making the combat pointless. Now I do think that the convoys had the potential to bring something interesting, however it's more of the same. Thunderpoon, Thunderpoon, Thunderpoon. And where the fuck is the guy with the flaming guitar? Jesus wept, these people have no idea of how to make a fun game. Seriously, fuck me. I'm really sick of this game, so instead of carrying on talking about everything that's wrong with the game, I'm going to tell you the question I kept asking myself while I was playing it. How effective could a video game be as a method of torture? And I think that speaks volumes of how this game made me feel. So let's end this shit. Is this game worth anything? No, it really isn't. Because it does nothing that other games haven't already done and done better. If you want the best out of the combat system, just get Arkham City, it pisses over this. The car combat is fundamentally a point and click game, and I think you'd be really hard pressed to find any modern open world game that's worse than this. It's easily up there with the worst open world games of this generation, and that's a highly competitive table to be high up in the league in. The worst crime this game is guilty of is lowering the standard of an already low standard genre, because it's clear that the bare minimum effort has been put into every aspect of this game. So if you want something that's set in the Mad Max world with car combat, go pick up Rage for a quid at CEX. And because of the fact that a 2012 Mad Max ripoff is better than the actual 2015 Mad Max game, I have no choice but to value Mad Max than less than a quid. Fuck Mad Max, fuck Avalanche Studios, you're incompetent Ubisoft wannabes. I don't think there's anything worse than that.